above all powers, above all kings, above all nature and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man.
In the Gospel of Mark, there is no writer's name. So we cannot tell exactly who wrote the Gospel. But early church historians such as Papias or Eusebius these two people, early historians, church historians, Papias, Eusebius, they all agree on Mark's authorship of the Mark Gospel, but they did not believe Mark received the message from God. They believe actually Peter received the message. Mark just copied what Peter received. Mark just copied, edited those messages for Peter. But I do not believe their position. It was written by Mark. Their position arises from the fact that Mark was simply Peter's interpreter. So they looked down Mark's position. They were reluctant to give a spiritual authority to Mark. They considered Mark simply as a Peter's interpreter. But their assertion, their position, their evaluation was not right. As we study Mark, that we will find their position was wrong. As we mentioned before, Mark Gospel was a kind of a supplementary gospel to the Matthew Gospel and Luke Gospel. Therefore, the Mark Gospel is not written by chronological sequence, not by chronological sequence. Which does not have an emphasis on historical aspect. No historical aspect. Change of paragraph. Mark's gospel has been treated very unjustly. Mark's gospel has been treated unjustly by many theological scholars. From the time of Augustine, open bracket, Augustine, 354 to 430. 354 to 430 AD. Augustine considers Mark's gospel is this appendix. You know meaning appendix? Yes. Okay, extra book. Appendix to Matthew gospel. Appendix to Matthew gospel. Even 5th century scholar, his name is Victor of Antioch Church. His name is Victor. He agrees with Augustine. Victor of Antioch Church. He agrees with Augustine by saying that Matthew is an appendix. No. The Mark is simply a appendix to Matthew, and even the languages, expressions are not highly sophisticated. It's not highly sophisticated. So throughout Christian history, the Mark Gospel has been treated very unfairly, not even considered as a primary gospel until the 18th century. In 18th century, and as we enter 19th century, one German theologian by the name of Holtzmann, it's a German man. He came out with a new suggestions on the Mark Gospel, claiming that the Mark Gospel is not supplementary to Matthew and Luke. It has its own independent value. But Mark wrote as the supplementary writer to Matthew and Luke. So we have to consider Mark's gospel very highly. From that time on, in beginning in 20th century, theologians considered the Mark Gospel, treated Mark Gospel as equally as other remaining three Gospels. Okay? Now change the paragraph. Mark came from very prestige and rich and royal family. He has other name, John. He has other name, John. Open bracket, Acts 12:12. Acts 12:12. And his mother, Maria, and open bracket, Acts 12:12. Was very rich, possessing many expensive real estate in the downtown Jerusalem. She was a devout, the follower of Jesus Christ. The mother, typically the mother of faith in the first church, Jerusalem church. She offered her building upstairs, called the upper room, for the 120 early Christians' prayer gatherings. Later, the Pentecostal experience was held in the upper room. The upper room became the first church in the Christian history. There is no indication of Mark's father's name recorded in the Bible. But in the Bible, the mother side family names are recorded. The mother's brother, Barnabas, who is the uncle of Mark. Barnabas also a one of the primary financial contributor to the Jerusalem church. Barnabas was born in Cyprus as a Jew, as a diaspora. But he often visited Jerusalem to take care of his properties in Jerusalem. He must have a business with Maria in Jerusalem. Barnabas must be one of the 120 members in the upper room. He was early Christians and one of the major leaders in the Jerusalem church. Not only that, he was a major financial contributor to the Jerusalem church, along with his sister Maria. Barnabas sold his property, land, to support the newly planted Jerusalem church. Twelve disciples were not financially well enough. They needed such Barnabas and Mary, who are financially well to do. It was God's providence. Maria's property was big enough to hold many people at a time. So her property was the disciples' gathering and praying place in Jerusalem. open bracket, Acts 4:31, Acts 12:12. Got it? Are you with me? The background here? Now change your paragraph. In the time of early Jerusalem church, Mark was a young boy. And very much cared by, especially Peter, simply because of Mark's family's financial contribution and their faithfulness in the Lord. And Peter and Barnabas maintained very good and intimate friendship. Later, when Paul visited Jerusalem, Barnabas made meeting arrangement with Peter. So the Barnabas, his nickname, Barnabas' original name is Joseph, but his nickname is Barnabas. Barnabas means encourager. Barnabas means encourager. So Joseph was very much the man of encouragement to everyone in the church community at the time. That's why people called him Barnabas. The Barnabas was strong advocate to Peter and Paul. Now, Barnabas later joined the Antioch church. And he became a senior pastor of the Antioch church. In open brackets, it said you put on AD, I would say around 45. Now Barnabas heard the message from Jesus that he needs to recruit Paul, who was in his hometown called Tarsus, Tarsus, Tarsus. Okay? You don't need a map here. You need all these stories, okay? Just to make very briefly. And Barnabas visited Tarsus to pick up Paul and brought him to Antioch. This in AD 45. And Paul became officially the assistant pastor to Barnabas in Antioch church. Because of Barnabas, Paul became officially the servant of God. In the Antioch church. After 1 year working together, and Jesus spoke to them, spoke to the Antioch church. Jesus spoke to the Antioch church to separate Paul and Barnabas for mission journey. So Antioch church appointed Paul and Barnabas as missionary. They took off for the first missionary journey. At the time, they took Mark together. Mark was a young boy at the time. But in the middle way of the first missionary journey, Mark left their mission trip. Paul was very angry at Mark. From that time on, Paul did not give much favor on Mark. But the later, Paul changed his mind. He accepted Mark as his co-worker. Okay? Mark was official translator of Peter. Peter considered Mark as his spiritual son. Open bracket, 1 Peter 5:13. Now, 1 Peter 5:13. Timothy was the spiritual son of who? Paul. Okay? Where? Open bracket. I gave you before. 1 Timothy. Chapter 1, verse 2. So now you've got, here two sons here. Paul's son is Timothy, and Peter's son is Mark. Don't forget that. Now, change your paragraph. Mark was the Peter's spiritual son and Peter's primary disciple. It is part of the reason that Mark's mother was very good to, has been very good to who? Peter. Not only that, Mark was a brilliant boy with a high educational background, fluent in Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Latin, while Peter was not. So whenever Peter received the message from Jesus in his preachings, Mark was always standing beside Peter, translated, interpreted Peter's preachings. Mark had followed Peter until Peter's death. I'll give you a good sentence here, okay? And subtitle called Mark, Barnabas, Peter, Paul relationship. Now, according to early church tradition and history, young Mark in AD 43, very young Mark, went to Alexandria, Egypt. He planted the first Egyptian church in Alexandria. In that area, in Alexandria, Egyptians were speaking in Coptic language. You hear Coptic language. So now church history says Mark is a founder, Egyptian Coptic church, which is very first church after Jerusalem church and Antioch church, even before Egyptian church, because before Paul started, Paul started the first missionary journey here in 46 here. Okay? So all the churches Paul planted were after this church. Coptic, Egyptian Coptic Orthodox Church. So even today, Egyptian Coptic Orthodox Church is so proud of their long history. That's why they are called themselves Orthodox. We are Orthodox. Here in Egyptian Coptic Orthodox Church produced many famous theologians and pastors in the Christian church history, such as Origen and Clement of Alexandria, and later Athanasius, Athanasius. Athanasius was the key church leader to denounce Arius's Arianism. Arius's Arianism. Because Arius also was the pastor of this Alexandrian church. So this Alexandrian church was very, very critical and famous church in the early 500 years church history. First 500 years of church history, that city, that church produced many good Christian leaders and bad Christian leaders. Who is bad? Arius. Yeah. It's all came from, they claim themselves that we are the descendant of who? Saint Mark. Okay? Now, the young Mark, after this Alexandria, he went back to Jerusalem to join his mother. Now, here in AD 45, Paul joined in Antioch church. In AD 45, Paul joined the Antioch church by the invitation of who? Barnabas. Okay, upon the Barnabas invitation. What happened is this. Here down Jerusalem church at that time, at that year, was hit by severe famine. The Jerusalem church hit by a severe famine. And of course, not enough number of members, because all these members, Jerusalem church members, scattered all over other parts of the world, okay? Not enough members, and famine hit, so that no offerings from the congregations. The church was so much in need of money. So Paul and Barnabas received the offering from Antioch church members, and took the money, carried the money with them for Jerusalem church. It was Paul's official visit to Jerusalem church, So it had a twofold purposes. One, Paul's introduction, official introduction to Jerusalem leaders. That's the first purpose. And the second is that bringing money, bringing financial help to the church. It has two purposes. Now, after that visit, and Barnabas suggested Paul that I have my nephew, missionary Mark, in this city. Can we take the Mark with us to Antioch? So Paul said, okay. So that is the beginning of Mark's visit to Antioch. Now, Mark visit to Antioch. That is Acts chapter 12, verse 25. Acts chapter 12, verse 25. Okay? Now, the following year, which is the 46th year, and here Paul and Barnabas took off for first missionary journey here. But as I told you, in the middle of the journey, Mark gave up. Mark gave up the journey. Acts 13:13. When Paul and Barnabas was ready for second missionary journey, when Paul and Barnabas was ready for second missionary journey, Barnabas suggested Paul, let us take Mark with us again. But Paul said, no, I don't want to take Mark with us. So that becomes a very intense argument and personal fighting. The Bible said they had a sharp fighting between Paul and Barnabas because of Mark. Why? Paul said, no, even he is your nephew, I don't want to take him because he cannot, he dropped himself off in the last journey, so I don't want that kind of coward and weak boy. And Barnabas said, why not? Let's try again, like that. Because of the Mark, Paul and Barnabas separated. They separated because of Mark. No longer partner. Even Paul was invited by Barnabas, but because of Mark's case, they separated. It's Acts 15, verse 39. And Barnabas said, okay, then I want to say bye-bye to you, Paul. I want to take my nephew Mark with me. I will take off for another mission journey. So, over here is Cyprus. Barnabas, this is Antioch. Barnabas took his nephew Mark with him. Then they went to Cyprus as a mission work. Right here. Barnabas and Mark to Cyprus. And Acts, it stops right here. From here, no more story thereafter. Okay? No more story of Barnabas and Mark stories. That's finished right here. But from that time on, all the stories of Paul. Okay, no more Barnabas mission stories. It's a Paul story. 52 is what? Second, Paul's second missionary journey story here. And later, 53 to 57, third missionary journey of Paul. Okay? You know, I've been telling you 1,000 times, so you know. Now, here, Paul got imprisoned here. First imprisonment. In what city? Rome. It's Rome here. He was imprisoned 62. Okay? Here, we found that Mark was in Rome with Paul. And their relationship was restored. Well, how we know? Colossians 4:10. Okay? Even Philemon 24. And Paul said, Mark is my fellow worker. Paul said, Mark is my fellow worker in Colossians 4:10. He was telling Colossian churches members that Mark is my special man, my fellow worker. Even he said to Philemon, okay, that he said that too. As he said, Mark is with me in Rome. He said that. Okay? At the time, Peter says in 1 Peter 5:13 said, Peter said, I am here in Rome with Mark. So all these stories combined together, we assume that when Paul was in the prison, okay, Barnabas was not, no. Who is there? Luke was there, because Luke was writing the Gospel of Luke at the time, okay? And who was there now? Mark was there. Peter was there. Here, then there's no official record of Peter's martyrdom, but you know, here in 65 around, Peter was upside down on the cross in Rome. At the time, we do not know where Mark, where Timothy, where Paul, but we assume that later in 67. 67 is the year that Paul was in second imprisonment. Paul was in second imprisonment in 67. In his second Timothy, in his second Timothy right here, he said this. Paul said this. Paul was sending letter to who? Timothy. Timothy was pastoring here in Ephesus. So Paul was writing letter from Rome to Ephesus, okay, where Timothy was senior pastor of the church of Ephesus. Timothy was a senior pastor at the time. Mark was there too, with the Timothy. So we assume that Mark may not be in here. Maybe other, 7 churches here. One of the 7 churches. Mark may be a senior pastor of one of the Samona church or whatever church is there, okay, in churches. So Paul said, Timothy, I want you to come to see me. And also he said, would you tell Mark, okay, come to see me with you? He said that. That means Mark should be near there. Okay? Okay, and Paul said this, Mark is beneficial to me. He said that in 2 Timothy 4:11. So you can tell this the Paul's relationship with what? With Mark has been restored at some point. Then 1 year after, Paul died by what? Beheaded, okay, in Rome. Okay? Then we do not know when Mark died, but we know for sure the Coptic church's tradition. Mark was dragged by chariot, okay, in Alexandria. You know chariot? Horse chariot. So Mark was carried by chariot and died in Alexandria. But we do not know when. So write it down that he died in Alexandria, okay, by chariot. But we do not know when. This is the tradition and brief survey of who is Mark.